An earlier instance of this video mentioned a member of DigiPen Institute staff by name. However, following messages from a number of current DigiPen students, this name has been removed to focus on the issue as a systematic problem. While I have received many messages of support from those affected by the issues in this video, grateful that the individual's behaviour was being brought up, others involved have noted that this may have a disproportionately negative effect on the health and mental well-being of a single faculty member when the focus should really be going to those with the oversight and power to remedy the issue. As a note, the individual did not reach out to me. DigiPen itself has not responded to requests for comment. This is a decision I'm making as a result of speaking to those directly affected by the situation with differing opinions on what the best course of action would be. To try and serve the concerns of every student I have spoken to, as well as preempt any harassment attempts that may be made to student and professor alike, it's been decided that the best course of action is to explicitly leave names out of it to focus on the systematic issues with the DigiPen Institute of Technology. Hello everyone, it's me, James Stephanie Sterling. Almost cute, if you squint a bit. I hope you all had a very nice weekend. I had a very violent one. I cannot yet show you any footage of the match I had this past weekend, but I've got souvenirs from steel chairs and thumbtacks. Oh no, I'm in pain. However, physical discomfort is nothing compared to the agony of having to think about the video game industry, which sadly is a misery I inflict upon myself and you every single week. So, there's an awful lot of awful shit floating about. We've got Ubisoft, the Sex Pest Company, diving headfirst into the NFT miasma. We've got the Game Awards, which took a hard stand against abuse, and then immediately promoted games from such abusive companies as Quantic Dream and the aforementioned Ubisoft. Fucking Jeff Keighley couldn't take a stand if he was a JoJo character. Then of course there's Peter Molyneux proving that NFTs are for scam artists because he's interested in them. A lot of awful shit indeed, and while I've had many people this past week come to me with their hopes or expectations or requests for subject matter on this week's Gymquisition, I actually have something a little bit different. You see, I've been working on something myself. I've been gathering testimonies of people affected by a video game related establishment, something that is not a publisher or a studio, but nonetheless has a huge amount of influence on the video game industry. I consider today's video subject quite interesting because I believe it sheds a lot of light on prevailing game industry attitudes and how workers are conditioned to accept their own exploitation. So, if you will join me, let's have a look at DigiPen and see what all their shit is about. It's shit. They're doing shit. It is shit. Ow. If you work within the game industry, there's a good chance you've heard of, possibly attended, the DigiPen Institute of Technology. A private, for-profit university based in Redmond, Washington, DigiPen proudly proclaims to be a means through which you can, and I quote, launch your career in games. Offering bachelor's and master's degrees in a number of video game industry subjects, including game design, animation, and computer science, it's seen as a gateway to game industry employment based on reputation alone. Perhaps you've heard of it. Some of its own professors, allegedly, may not have. So, I understand this is some kind of game school? Is a quote from one such professor who walked into a class 20 minutes late and didn't seem to know or care about what was being taught. This is according to one of many DigiPen students who have shared testimonials with me under the strict condition of anonymity. As is often sadly the way with those who share game industry stories, justifiably scared as they are of that industry blacklisting them. The stories I've been able to gather paint the picture of a college that can indeed launch your career in games, but does so at the cost of your well-being. DigiPen can teach its students many things about game development, but one thing it teaches more than anything else is crunch. It teaches students how to be overworked, undervalued, and completely compliant with their own exploitation. In the first multidisciplinary game team class, to get 100% on your report card, you need to get 128% on the project, stated a student who reached out to me. It is literally impossible. We are held to impossible standards and told that if we have bad grades, we just don't really want to be in the game industry. It's bullshit. According to this person, one of the college's most beloved and respected professors yells and cusses out disabled kids, at one point yelling at a girl for the crime of being blind. His therapy license, revoked, is used to justify his beliefs on which students possess enough empathy to be legitimate game designers. We'll be coming back to that fella. The school's grading system has been criticised by those I spoke to. According to one testimony, there's no standardised method of grading attendees, with the university's curriculum being described as an echo chamber of designers trying to create the best grading systems and course sequences, but somehow mucking it up every time. Experiences with these systems has been described as morale crushing, as students fail to meet the unrealistic goals set for them. More than one student related to me that aforementioned constant need to complete well over 100% of classes. None of the teachers could actually define a research paper, notes one testimony. They didn't want a post-mortem, but it had to be a paper about what you did on the project. But it had to be something you didn't directly work on that semester, but you had to relate it back to your work on that semester. Also, it could be a post-mortem. If that seemed confusing to you, those were the exact feelings we had those remaining 7 weeks. Not a single teacher, even when they were all together, could accurately tell us what they wanted out of this paper. The GAM courses, which are DigiPen's primary selling point, can be absolute clusterfucks, I'm told. Firstly, your first GAM courses, freshman and sophomore year, require you to build custom engines from scratch. Yes, you are required to build an engine from scratch before you've even properly learned coding. I never understood a thing in that entire class because it made no sense. We here on the show have criticised the misguided and harmful notion of crunch in the game industry many times on this show. It's an explicit failure of management that wrongly asserts workers are productive when coerced into excessive overtime and worked to the point of literal breakdowns. Rockstar, BioWare, Epic Games, and many other studios have been accused of engaging in crunch culture. With its harsh completion requirements and emphasis on the sacrifice of free time, it seems that DigiPen, as a means of entering the game industry, designs its classes to condition would-be game developers into crunchable drones. After all, students who fail to meet the ridiculous requirements for completion are told they're not cut out for games. To quote, "The professors would waste a quarter to half of the time with a lecture that taught nothing and was mostly them romanticising crunch as passion." We've done an entire video in the past on the game industry's exploitation of the notion of passion. And here we come to find out they're literally teaching it. One former student, when trying to decide if DigiPen was right for them, asked current attendees about their experiences. While I understood it was a small school, it had absolutely no life to it, as if students simply did not want to chat about their school, I was told. Simply put, I was warned. I was warned not to go with the BSGD degree due to its immense difficulty and something that was not readily available, high dropout rate. I was warned 75% dropout and only 12% graduate on time. Numbers that seemed wrong, but I would learn to be more or less accurate. It said that the high dropout rate is a point of pride for DigiPen, that it believes crushing students until they leave means those who graduate are the best of the best. The overworking is bad enough that for some students, they have to micromanage their time down to 15-minute blocks just to eke out enough space to eat. Any potential free time is expected to be time spent working. Now this is a problem with higher education overall. Personally, I believe any competent curriculum should explicitly teach work-life bloody balance. DigiPen will tell its students that it wants them to practice self-care, but its own practices run counter to that stated desire, all while the lecturers extol the virtues of working oneself to the bone. After all, if you're not killing yourself for this industry, you just don't want it bad enough, right? And other such corporate propagandist bullshit. At the very least, this is how DigiPen wants to make you feel and what it pushes you to do, I was told. Regardless of what DigiPen says and how much they don't encourage it, you are not going to make it without crunching. While many professors are said to be good at their jobs, the lack of available teachers makes the nastier ones near impossible to remove. One professor self-describes himself as the dragon atop the mountain, the one who quite self-satisfactorily refuses to pass his students. Described in more than one account as an incredibly toxic force. His teaching style is described as brutally overworking people, as well as failing to provide them the required educational information to complete their tasks. One section in particular was meant to be passed along from student to student by word of mouth rather than actively taught. He would tell information to some students, but not to all of them. This was done even when classes were new, communication involved a handful of Discord servers and nobody really knew each other. In these classes, grades were not provided to students and they were kept in the dark about how well they were actually performing. Rather than self-reflect on the C's and D's he would eventually hand out, this professor was pleased with how many dropped out, achieved low scores, and couldn't handle his so-called teaching style. While many would rightly assume that such low performance required at least some eyes cast toward the tutor, this was not the case here. It was seen as good education. During one lecture, a fellow classmate simply asked if he could repeat something he had said. He responded by yelling at her, complaining that she wasn't paying attention, yelling loud and harsh enough that it triggered a PTSD attack. We had dealt with a lack of communication, a lack of knowledge about our standings, an incredibly harsh workload for each project, and a lack of basic respect as human beings. A student compiled these complaints into a document and asked others to sign it so that it could be turned into a higher faculty member. The professor caught wind of it and threatened to get whoever started it expelled. Somewhere along the way, either he, the original student, or a bystander started calling it a manifesto. The next week, the professor did start acting with more openness and a less cruel tone. That lasted just 1 week before things were back to how they had been before. The class that had complained then became known as the problem cohort, the group other students should avoid resembling. Once again acting as an allegory for the game industry itself, DigiPen's culture retaliated against those who dared speak up. This is the one who yelled at the blind student, refusing to accommodate her disability while writing on a whiteboard and going so far as to say, and I quote, "Get over yourself," when he was called out on it. He yelled at one autistic student for stimming, told an entire class to drop out for not being real designers, and generally earned a reputation for being an abusive bully, threatening expulsion and other disciplinary methods at the slightest protest. A number of professors have game industry experience that is no longer relevant to today. They've been out of active game development for years and are applying their experiences from a very different era to modern game design. In one description, I'm told, one computer science teacher actually used to work at Nintendo, but that was several decades ago. But because of that status and tenure, they were never able to be removed, regardless of how often students complained about that teacher's lack of communication, poor notes, and vague or harsh requirements. A physics professor was constantly lambasted by students as they had a repeat history of dismissing students, treating them like they were stupid, and giving ridiculous homework that did not cover what had actually been quote-unquote taught in class. Not all students want to see DigiPen completely trashed. As well as boasting at least some good teachers, it's been praised for its commitment to diversity with an incredibly welcoming attitude toward LGBTQ+ students in particular. However, there is one testimony that's really fucking harsh and lays bare the intent by the college to create crunch-ready resources rather than creative contributors to the industry. DigiPen is a farce, this person says. It is a cabal of nepotism and greed spearheaded by former industry professionals with no concern for artistry or the betterment of the industry. Their key interest lies with monetary gain alone, and they seek to instill this self-same desire in their students. DigiPen is a school which builds corporate drones to serve under its corporate allies, and it makes no allusions to the contrary. The school justifies this blatant crunch which they subject every student to by dubbing it realistic preparation, or throwing us straight into the deep end. To clarify, and to put it in more blunt terms, they actually believe that abusing their students, depriving them of sleep, subjecting them to hours of intensive development, making them dependent on the school in every way, and battering them with relentless, subjective, and often false criticism will somehow make them resistant to future abuses by the very companies they hand-deliver the students to. This idea is ludicrous enough that I should hope it needs no further admonishment. You can't strengthen someone's skull by taking a lead pipe to it, you're only going to smash it to pieces. The same is true of our mental health. DigiPen was reached out to the week prior to the publishing of this episode and did not respond. Crunch culture is still a huge problem in the video game industry. We know it's bad. It's statistically bad. It's provably bad. And yet we have these old-fashioned people with old-fashioned ideas who have it drilled into their own conditioned skulls that this sort of abusive practice, this terrible failure of leadership is somehow good management. It's not. Overworking people to the point of breakdowns is not good leadership, it's shit. You have failed, you are bad at your job if you are a leader in the game industry and you crunch your workers. Anyone in the game industry, be they a professor at a college or a producer at a studio, anyone with a position of leadership and trust and respect in the game industry that has preached the virtues of crunch and misrepresented it as passion is an exploitative, coercive creep. You're a creep if you're the kind of person that does that. DigiPen as an institution feeds the video game industry fresh bodies, and we even know that companies like Epic refer to workers as just bodies. That's all they see them as, they're meat for the grinder. And these attitudes simply have to stop. They have to stop. They're widely criticised, they are wrong, scientifically, objectively wrong, and the ideas behind them are perpetuated by friggin' dinosaurs, so cut it out. That's how I end my journalism, thank God for me.